My son vanished without a trace, leaving behind a frantic search and a $5 million empire. Less than 48 hours later, his grieving wife stood on my front lawn, wrapped in a designer trench coat, screaming to the police that I had stolen every last dime of his fortune. She played the part of the devastated widow flawlessly. But as I watched her point a manicured finger at my door, I did not panic. I stayed completely silent, because I knew exactly what she had done, and I knew exactly where my son was. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers pulsed through the sheer curtains of my living room window, casting harsh shadows against the walls of the home where I had raised my children. At 62 years old, after a long career as a pediatric nurse, my evenings were usually quiet. But tonight, the peaceful suburban silence was shattered. I stood perfectly still by the glass, watching the chaotic scene unfolding on my pristine front lawn. Jacqueline was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She was sobbing hysterically, her shoulders shaking underneath a heavy, wildly expensive coat. Two police officers were trying to calm her down, but she kept thrashing her arms, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my oak front door. Her voice cut through the cool night air, shrill and demanding, making sure every neighbor on the block could hear her. She was determined to humiliate me, to paint me as the villain in a tragedy she had entirely orchestrated. I could feel my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm in my chest, not out of fear, but out of a deep, simmering fury. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing the front of my cardigan, waiting for the heavy footsteps that I knew were coming up my porch stairs. The sharp, authoritative knock rattled the door frame. I opened it slowly, meeting the stern gazes of the two officers. Jacqueline practically shoved her way past them. Her face flushed, her makeup perfectly smudged to mimic genuine heartbreak. She pointed right at my chest and yelled that Marcus had been missing for 2 agonizing days. She told the officers that while she was busy searching hospitals and calling friends in a blind panic, I was busy robbing my own flesh and blood. She claimed I had illegally transferred $5 million out of his business and personal accounts, emptying his life savings while he was mysteriously unaccounted for. The officers looked at me, their hands resting near their duty belts, waiting for my defense. They expected me to crumble, to cry, to beg for understanding. Instead, I locked eyes with my daughter-in-law. I looked right through the fake tears and the trembling lip. The cold, calculating greed hiding just beneath her surface was glaringly obvious to me. She stared back, and in that fleeting second, I saw a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She really thinks she has won, I thought to myself. She thinks she has outsmarted the old woman and secured her payout. I offered no excuses to the police. I just stood there, eerily calm, letting her dig a hole so deep she would never ever climb out. To understand how we ended up on this terrifying precipice, you have to understand the foundation of blood, sweat, and absolute devotion that built my son's life. Raising Marcus and his sister Aisha entirely on my own was never easy. Their father walked away when they were barely old enough to remember his face, leaving me with a mountain of bills and a fierce, burning determination to give my children the world. I spent decades working exhausting double shifts as a pediatric nurse at the county hospital. My feet would ache so badly by the end of a 14-hour rotation that I could barely walk to my car. But every grueling hour was worth it. Every paycheck went toward making sure they never felt the sting of our financial struggle. I skipped meals so they could have new winter coats, and I poured every extra dime into a college fund for Marcus. He was a brilliant, driven young man with a heart made of pure gold. We shared a bond that was forged in those quiet late-night moments over the kitchen table where I would help him with his math homework after a grueling shift. He saw the sacrifices I made, and he used them as fuel. When he graduated with top honors, I wept with a pride so profound it physically ached. Marcus took that education and built a logistics software company from the ground up, working out of a cramped garage, until his brilliant ideas caught the attention of major investors. Within a few short years, my sweet, hard-working boy was running a highly successful, multi-million-dollar enterprise. He employed hundreds of people and changed the entire industry. But despite the sudden wealth and the fancy magazine articles calling him a tech visionary, Marcus remained the same kind, generous and incredibly trusting soul I had raised him to be. He bought me the modest, comfortable home I live in now, insisting. It was the least he could do after everything I had done for him. He wanted to take care of everyone around him, always seeing only the best in people. It was a beautiful, pure and rare trait, but one that would ultimately become his greatest and most dangerous vulnerability when a ruthless predator decided to step into his trusting life. That predator came perfectly disguised in designer labels and a charming smile. When Marcus first introduced us to Jacqueline, I tried desperately to share in his immense happiness. She was undeniably beautiful, highly polished, and knew exactly how to work a room. But as the months turned into years, the subtle toxic shift in our family dynamics became impossible to ignore. Jacqueline was incredibly materialistic, viewing Marcus not as a partner, but as an endless bank account to fund her lavish lifestyle. She demanded sprawling mansions, luxury cars, and extravagant vacations, treating his hard-earned money like a bottomless well. Worse than her greed were the calculated microaggressions she used to isolate him. She slowly and systematically began alienating Marcus from his sister Aisha. It started with skipped family dinners and convenient excuses, but soon escalated to passive-aggressive comments about Aisha's career choices and lifestyle. Jacqueline wanted absolute control over Marcus, and that meant cutting away the people who truly loved him. Her thinly veiled contempt extended to me as well. She would walk into my comfortable, modest home and look around with a polite, frozen smile that disguised her deep disdain. She would make offhand remarks about my simple furniture or my affordable clothes, ensuring I knew exactly where I stood in her eyes. I saw right through her perfectly manicured facade. Every instinct in my body screamed that this woman was a parasite, draining the life and joy out of my son while pretending to be his devoted wife. Yet I swallowed my pride, time and time again. I bit my tongue at holiday gatherings when she flaunted her ridiculously expensive new diamond bracelets. And I forced a smile when she made cutting jokes at my expense. I did it all to keep the peace, purely for my son's sake. I knew that criticizing the woman he loved would only push him further away, straight into the isolating trap she was carefully building. So I ignored my agonizing gut feeling and played the role of the supportive mother-in-law, praying that Marcus would eventually open his eyes and see the dangerous viper he had so willingly let into his nest. I never could have imagined just how venomous her bite would turn out to be. The memory of what happened exactly 3 nights before the flashing police lights surrounded my house is burned into my mind forever. It was past 2 in the morning, and a heavy, relentless rain was lashing against the vinyl siding of my home. I was always a light sleeper, a restless habit formed during my many years working the grueling night shift at the pediatric ward. When I heard the frantic, desperate pounding on my back porch door, my blood ran instantly cold. Nobody knocks like that in the dead of night, unless a terrible tragedy has struck. I threw on my thick fleece robe and hurried through the dark kitchen, the cold linoleum freezing against my bare feet. I peered through the small glass pane, expecting to see a neighbor in distress or a stranded motorist looking for help. Instead, staring back at me from the pouring rain was my beautiful, brilliant son. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt and threw the door open, gasping out loud as Marcus stumbled into the warmth of the kitchen. I was soaking wet and shaking violently from head to toe. This was not the confident, polished chief executive officer who commanded corporate boardrooms and negotiated multi-million-dollar deals with ease. The man standing in front of me was entirely broken. His expensive tailored shirt was torn to shreds and caked with thick brown mud, and a dark, ugly purple bruise was blooming across his left cheekbone. He looked absolutely terrified, his eyes wide and darting around my kitchen as if he expected someone to leap out from the shadows and grab him. Before I could even ask what had happened, before I could reach out to pull him into a warm, motherly embrace, he thrust a heavy, scuffed metal briefcase into my hands. It was surprisingly heavy, and the cold metal chilled my skin. He locked the deadbolt behind him with trembling hands and leaned against the solid oak door, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, gasping for air. I dropped to my knees beside him, my heart shattering into a million pieces. I asked him who had done this to him, who had dared to hurt my boy. Marcus looked up at me, tears mixing with the rainwater on his bruised face, and whispered that his entire life was a lie. The heavy briefcase sitting on my kitchen floor held the darkest, most devastating secrets a mother could ever imagine. In that agonizing moment, sitting on the floor of my quiet suburban home, the tension in the air was so thick it was hard to breathe. The nightmare was only just beginning, and the monster responsible was someone we had welcomed into our family with open arms. Marcus dragged himself off the floor and carried that heavy briefcase to the dining room table, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the combination lock. When the metal latches finally clicked open, he revealed the horrifying truth that had brought him to my door in the middle of the night. Over the past few months, he had noticed strange, inexplicable financial discrepancies in his personal accounts and the company ledgers. Trusting his sharp business instincts, he had quietly hired a top-tier private investigator to look into the missing funds. The briefcase was overflowing with the undeniable, catastrophic proof of the investigator's findings. There were thick stacks of bank statements, detailed burner phone logs, and long-printed transcripts of hidden camera audio. As Marcus spread the documents across my lace tablecloth, the sheer magnitude of the betrayal became sickeningly clear. Jacqueline, the woman who smiled at my dinner table and slept beside my son, every single night had been systematically bleeding him dry. She had been secretly siphoning millions of dollars out of his accounts, moving the money through a complex, untraceable web of anonymous shell companies. The final destination for all that stolen wealth was her brother Terence. Terence was a smooth-talking grifter who always seemed to have a new, flashy business venture that never quite materialized. Together, Jacqueline and Terence were using my son's hard-earned fortune to fund a massive, fraudulent offshore real estate scheme in the Caribbean. They were buying up luxury properties under fake names, building an illegal empire entirely with Marcus's money. I stared at the bank statements in total disbelief, tracing the highlighted lines showing wire transfers of $50,000 here, $100,000 there, all funneling directly into Terence's pockets. Marcus explained that Jacqueline had manipulated his passwords, forged his signature on wire authorizations, and intercepted the bank notifications on his phone. She had played the role of the loving, supportive wife perfectly, all while orchestrating one of the most ruthless and calculated financial frauds I had ever seen. The pain in my son's voice was unbearable, as he realized the woman he loved had looked at him not as a husband, but as an easy mark. She had preyed on his generosity and his trusting nature, viewing his immense success as nothing more than a bank vault waiting to be cracked open. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I looked at the undeniable proof of her boundless greed. But the financial devastation was only the tip of the iceberg, and the true depth of Jacqueline's depravity was far worse than stolen money. The conflict shifted instantly from a devastating financial crime to a chilling, fatal threat. Marcus reached deep into the side pocket of the briefcase and pulled out a small digital voice recorder. He told me the private investigator had managed to place a hidden listening device in Jacqueline's luxury sport utility vehicle. His hands trembled violently as he pressed the play button. The recording was slightly muffled by engine noise, but the voices were unmistakably clear. I heard Jacqueline and Terence talking their tone, shockingly casual, as they discussed my son's life and death. Terence brought up the idea of a divorce, suggesting they just take the money they had already stolen and run far away. But Jacqueline immediately shot the idea down. Her voice was cold hard and utterly soulless, as she explained that a divorce would split the assets too much, tying them up in lengthy legal battles and potentially exposing their offshore fraud during the discovery process. Then she said the words that will haunt me until the very last day of my life. She calmly suggested that if Marcus were to have a sudden fatal accident while out hiking, she would automatically become the sole beneficiary of his entire $5 million estate. There would be no messy divorce, no suspicious lawyers, just a grieving widow inheriting absolutely everything. The breath completely left my lungs. They were actively plotting to murder my child. The horrifying reality of Marcus's bruised and battered appearance suddenly made terrifying, crystal clear sense. With tears streaming down his face, Marcus explained that he had gone for his usual weekend hike on a secluded mountain trail earlier that afternoon. A man he had never seen before had shoved him violently from behind near a steep, rocky drop-off. Marcus had barely managed to grab onto a thick tree root, scraping his face and tearing his clothes as he pulled himself back up from the jagged edge of the cliff. The attacker had fled, assuming Marcus had fallen to his death on the rocks below. It was not a random assault or a clumsy accident. It was a paid hit, orchestrated by his own wife. As the digital recorder clicked off, an overwhelming, suffocating silence filled my dining room. I looked at my son, realizing how incredibly close I had come to losing him forever. In that exact moment, every ounce of my maternal grief, every single shred of sadness, instantly evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, calculating, and absolutely ruthless fury. Jacqueline had crossed a line that no mother on this earth could ever forgive. She had mistaken my polite silence and my endless patience for weakness. But she was about to learn that there is nothing in this world more dangerous than a mother protecting her child. My sadness turned into solid steel, and I knew exactly what I had to do to destroy her. I looked at my trembling son and knew that crying would not save him. Panic is a luxury we simply could not afford in this situation. I walked over to the kitchen sink, poured a tall glass of cold water and handed it to him. I told him to drink it down and to listen to me very carefully. If Jacqueline believed her hired thug had succeeded on that mountain, we had a very narrow, fragile window of time to act before she realized Marcus was still alive. We were not going to run away, and we were certainly not going to wait around for her to try again. We were going to dismantle her completely, piece by piece. I pulled my heavy laptop from my home office and set it on the dining room table right next to the horrifying evidence of her betrayal. I told Marcus he needed to legally sever Jacqueline from every single dime he had left to his name. With his hands still shaking violently, Marcus logged into his highly secure banking portals. Over the next 3 excruciating hours, working through the dead of night, we methodically drained his personal and business accounts. He transferred all $5 million into a newly created, airtight, irrevocable trust. He legally named me as the sole executor, completely locking Jacqueline out of his entire estate and ensuring she could never touch another penny. It was a massive, sweeping financial maneuver, but it was entirely legal, and it was the only way to bait the trap I was already building in my mind. Once the transfers were fully verified and the trust was sealed tight, I knew Marcus had to disappear for real. If Jacqueline found him before my plan was executed, she would just hire someone else to finish the job. I packed a small duffel bag with my own savings in untraceable cash, some warm winter clothes, and a prepaid cell phone. I told him he was going to drive my old sedan, not his highly recognizable luxury car, and he was going straight across state lines to stay with his sister Aisha. Aisha was fierce, intensely protective, and completely disconnected from Jacqueline's toxic web. She would hide him, keep him perfectly safe, and ensure absolutely nobody knew he was still breathing. I hugged my son tightly at the back door, kissing his bruised cheek. I promised him that the next time he saw his evil wife, she would be wearing steel handcuffs. He slipped out into the dark, rainy night, vanishing without a single trace. By the time the sun came up, I had scrubbed the kitchen floor clean, hidden the heavy briefcase of evidence in a secure floorboard in my attic, and sat down at my kitchen table with a hot cup of black coffee. I was perfectly prepared to play my part. I just had to wait for Jacqueline to realize her golden goose was missing and watch her endless greed drive her straight into my trap. That brings us back to the flashing police lights and the chaotic, embarrassing scene on my front lawn. After Jacqueline made her hysterical, screaming accusations to the officers, I calmly agreed to accompany them to the precinct for official questioning. I rode in the back of the cramped police cruiser. In complete silence, my posture perfectly straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. When we arrived at this busy station, they placed me in a cold, brightly lit interrogation room. Through the thin, poorly insulated walls, I could clearly hear Jacqueline in the adjacent room. She was still putting on her grand performance, weeping loudly and demanding that the police arrest me immediately. She was telling anyone who would listen that her beloved husband was missing, and his malicious, jealous mother had stolen their entire life savings. 2 seasoned detectives eventually walked into my room carrying thick yellow notepads and looking at me with a mixture of heavy suspicion and mild pity. They sat down across the scratched metal table and asked me point blank if I had maliciously transferred $5 million out of my son's bank accounts. This was the exact moment I had been waiting for all night. I did not raise my voice, I did not cry, and I did not act defensive. I played the role of a confused, deeply concerned mother who was simply trying to cooperate with the authorities during a family emergency. I reached into my sturdy leather handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope containing the certified, legally binding documents for the irrevocable trust. I slid the heavy stack of paperwork across the table. I told them calmly that my son had voluntarily established this trust just days ago, specifically naming me as the executor to protect his corporate assets. I explained that I had not stolen anything at all, and that Marcus had legally initiated every single transfer himself before he completely dropped out of contact. The detectives reviewed the intricate legal documents carefully, their initial hostility slowly shifting into genuine, absolute confusion. The paperwork was entirely flawless. I knew, and I was absolutely counting on the fact that Jacqueline's frantic accusations of a stolen $5 million had just turned a simple missing persons case into a major federal financial investigation. By aggressively demanding the police look into the missing money, Jacqueline had unwittingly invited federal scrutiny right to her own front door. I politely suggested to the detectives that if they wanted to understand why Marcus felt the sudden desperate need to protect his remaining wealth, they should probably conduct a full forensic audit of all his joint accounts with his wife. I planted the seed gently, making it seem like a helpful suggestion from a worried mother, knowing full well it was the spark that would burn Jacqueline's entire criminal world to the ground. The detectives exchanged a heavy, knowing look, and one of them immediately left the room to make a phone call. The trap was beautifully set, and Jacqueline had eagerly locked herself inside it. The absolute beauty of Jacqueline's towering arrogance was that she truly believed she was so much smarter than everyone else in the room. By screaming to the local police and formally reporting a massive $5 million theft, She forced the department to immediately bring in federal investigators. You cannot claim that kind of substantial wealth has been stolen without triggering an immediate, intense financial probe by the government. I sat quietly in that freezing interrogation room for several hours, sipping stale water from a paper cup, patiently waiting for the inevitable dominoes to fall. I watched the remaining detective through the small glass window as the precinct buzzed with sudden, urgent activity. Federal agents arrived dressed in sharp, dark suits, carrying thick folders and laptops. Because I had willingly provided the trust documents and gently pointed them toward the joint accounts. The highly trained investigators knew exactly where to start digging. They were not just looking at the money Marcus had moved into the trust. They were looking at absolutely everything. I had subtly left a trail of strategic breadcrumbs in my official statement mentioning odd banking alerts Marcus had complained about recently. It did not take long for the forensic accountants to find exactly what I knew they would find. I watched the lead detective walk back into my room. His entire demeanor completely transformed. He did not look at me like a criminal suspect anymore. He looked at me like a crucial witness to a massive, sprawling conspiracy. He sat down heavily and asked me if I knew a man named Terence. I feigned mild surprise and confirmed that Terence was Jacqueline's brother. The detective leaned over the table, his voice low and deadly serious. He revealed that while looking for the allegedly stolen $5 million, the federal agents had discovered dozens of massive, unauthorized wire transfers originating from Jacqueline's personal laptop, sending millions of dollars directly into shady offshore accounts controlled by Terence. But the financial snare I had laid caught an even deadlier, far more horrifying prize. In her absolute supreme confidence that Marcus was dead at the bottom of a cliff, and the money was securely hers, Jacqueline had made one final fatal mistake. She had used a joint account to wire a massive, untraceable $50,000 payment to an unknown associate just hours after Marcus was violently attacked on the mountain. The federal agents had already flagged the suspicious transaction and identified the recipient as a known violent felon with a long criminal record. The digital money trail connected Jacqueline directly to the hitman who had tried to push my son off a cliff. She had built her own financial gallows, and by trying to frame me for theft, she had personally handed the execution rope to the federal government. The tension in the busy precinct reached a boiling point, and I knew the highly anticipated climax of this nightmare was finally here. The heavy metal door of the interrogation room finally clicked open, and the lead detective escorted me out into the brightly lit main lobby of the precinct. I walked slowly, my head held high, my posture perfectly straight. Jacqueline was standing near the front desk, flanked by two uniformed officers. She was still wearing that ridiculously expensive designer trench coat, her arms crossed tight over her chest. The second she saw me walk out without handcuffs, her fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by an ugly, twisting rage. She lunged forward, pointing that same manicured finger right at my face, screaming at the top of her lungs. She demanded to know why I was not locked in a cell. She shrieked that I was a thief, a liar, and that I had stolen $5 million from her missing husband. The lobby fell completely silent as her shrill voice echoed off the concrete walls. But I did not flinch, and I did not look away. I just stared right into her eyes, waiting for the devastating blow I knew was coming. The lead detective stepped smoothly between us. He did not raise his voice, but his tone was like absolute ice. He looked directly at Jacqueline and told her to put her hands behind her back. For a split second, she looked utterly confused, as if he had spoken a foreign language. She stammered, asking what he was talking about. Then the detective pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt and formally read Jacqueline her Miranda rights. He loudly declared that she was being placed under immediate arrest for massive federal wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Jacqueline physically recoiled as if she had been slapped across the face. Her jaw dropped open and the color completely drained from her perfect, heavily contoured cheeks. She started to thrash wildly, screaming that they were making a massive mistake. She yelled that Marcus was dead, that he was gone forever, and that I was the one who had taken all the money. She was losing her mind, completely trapped in the horrible web of lies she had spun. And then the heavy double-glass doors of the precinct entrance slowly slid open. The timing was absolutely flawless. The cool morning breeze swept through the lobby, and standing there perfectly unharmed and flanked by two tall federal agents was my beautiful son. Marcus stepped into the harsh fluorescent light of the police station. He looked strong, composed, and completely alive. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Jacqueline stopped thrashing instantly, her eyes locked onto Marcus, and I watched the absolute terrifying realization wash over her entire body. The supreme confidence, the arrogant smirk, the flawless victim act. It all shattered into a million tiny pieces. Her knees completely buckled beneath her. She collapsed onto the cold tile floor, a crumpled, pathetic mess of designer clothing and broken lies. The shock and total defeat in her wide, panicked eyes was the single most deeply satisfying thing I have ever witnessed in my 62 years of life. She realized in that agonizing moment that she had lost absolutely everything. Her freedom, her stolen wealth, and her perfect scheme were all completely destroyed. She was nothing more than a common criminal caught in her own trap, and as the officers hauled her roughly to her feet and dragged her away, I felt a massive, heavyweight lift completely off my shoulders. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Within 48 hours of her humiliating arrest, federal agents kicked down the door of a luxury hotel suite and dragged her brother Terence out in heavy chains. The mountain of financial evidence we had handed directly to the authorities was entirely foolproof. Faced with decades behind bars in a harsh federal penitentiary, Terence immediately turned on his sister, eagerly signing a plea deal that completely doomed them both. Jacqueline is currently sitting in a cold, lonely maximum security cell, facing 25 to life for attempting to orchestrate the murder of her own husband. She will never wear another designer coat, and she will never spend another dime of my son's hard-earned money. With the nightmare finally over, Marcus aggressively reclaimed his life and took full control of his software company. He changed every lock, secured every account, and slowly began the long process of healing from the devastating betrayal. The $5 million remained perfectly safe inside the irrevocable trust, untouched and completely secure. But the money was never what truly mattered to any of us. What mattered most was that the toxic poison had been surgically removed from our lives forever. Today, the warm afternoon sun is shining brightly on my quiet suburban street. I am sitting comfortably on my front porch, gently rocking in my favorite wooden chair, sipping a warm cup of sweet tea. Marcus and Aisha are sitting right beside me, laughing together at a silly joke, their bond completely restored and stronger than it has ever been. My family is finally whole again, safe from the incredible evil that tried to tear us apart. As I look at my two beautiful children, I cannot help but reflect on the absolute ferocity of a mother's love. Most of the time, that love is a warm, nurturing light that guides our children through the dark. We sacrifice, we comfort, and we endlessly forgive. But people like Jacqueline make a very dangerous, fatal miscalculation. They look at a gentle, aging mother and see nothing but weakness. They fail to realize that when our children are threatened, that warm light instantly turns into a blazing, unstoppable fire. A mother's love will nurture her family through anything. But if you dare to threaten the lives of the children she built from the ground up, that exact same love will absolutely destroy you. They say that a mother's intuition is never wrong, And after everything my family has been through, I know that to be the absolute truth. We often try to silence that quiet voice inside us, especially when it tells us uncomfortable things about the people we let into our homes. I ignored the warning signs for years, hoping that love would be enough to change a toxic heart. But I learned the hardest way possible, that you cannot love the greed out of a truly selfish person. My story is a warning to anyone who thinks they can prey on the kindness of a devoted family. A mother's protective wrath is not something anyone should ever test. We might look soft and we might be polite, but greed will always build its own gallows. Jacqueline thought she was pulling the strings, but her own arrogance and absolute lack of morality became the exact weapons that destroyed her. She traded her freedom for a fortune she could never keep. If you found yourself holding your breath until Jacqueline got exactly what she deserved, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where justice never misses. Our community is built on sharing these powerful truths and standing together against those who think they can take advantage of good, honest people. Your support helps us continue bringing these incredible stories to light. I would absolutely love to hear from you today. Let me know in the comments down below, where are you watching from today? And how long have you been part of our storytelling family? Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and remember to always trust your gut. Fiercely protect the people you love, and never let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness. Stay safe out there.